I was just thinking as I heard John talking that I think that the King of Bhutan's comment is actually underappreciated. It's been very much turned into a call to measure something else, to measure things that GDP doesn't measure. But I think that kind of the offhand way he made it, he was saying that we should not lose ourselves in pursuit of the measurable. And John actually hinted at this also when he said leisure time. I mean, you could quantify that, but can you distinguish between leisure time spent watching television and leisure time spent, reading stories to your kids or taking care of a sick person or something like that? So I think that the change that we need here goes a lot deeper than merely shifting the things that we measure and trying to maximize GNH or GPI rather than GDP. Because in my life, at least, the things that make me feel rich are not something that I could quantify or put a number to. I was, well, maybe I'll list some of them. Some of the things that, I feel like these happiness indexes that rank the Scandinavian countries on top and maybe Costa Rica and Thailand close up to the top too. I think they're highly problematic. And the United States gets ranked quite high in those rankings as well, because they're so much based on our cultural conditioning, what the appropriate response is and what we compare ourselves to. So we have an ideology here that we should be happy because look how rich we are, look at all the stuff we have, and if you're not happy, you must have some kind of problem. You're a misfit of some sort. So I think that our reference point and our identity around happiness totally screw up those statistics. What makes me happy are definitely, the things that can't be measured. Intimacy, connection, the feeling of belonging, of being at home in the universe, having meaningful work, having an environment that is beautiful to me, hearing insects and birds. Like, that's a kind of wealth that you really can't quantify. And that's the kind of wealth that is increasingly absent in our culture. All of that's been taken away and replaced by the things that we can count and measure, commodities, and manufactured, standardized environments. Immersed in that poverty, of course, we seek more and more of of whatever's available, more and more of the measurable to compensate for a loss of the infinite and the qualitative. But really, how much stuff do you have to own to compensate for the lack of intimacy, for the lack of connection? How much can assuage that feeling of not being at home in the universe? I was just at this festival in Costa Rica, and I was hanging out with a philosopher friend of mine. He actually is like a professor of philosophy who also goes to psychedelic festivals, which in itself is a hopeful sign. And we were like in the hotel then, like on our way back. This is a long and not that interesting story, but we found ourselves back in the normal environment of right angles, and standard objects and stuff. And we were like, are we crazy to think that this is normal? And that time outside, barefoot, with the sounds of the jungle, dancing, like howler monkeys were up in the trees above us. And I looked at those howler monkeys, and I pointed them out to Joshua, and I said, there's the struggle to survive, right there. They were lounging around all day, occasionally maybe going to look for some food, but we project our poverty onto the rest of life. and then use that projection to justify our economic system, which is always about running away from a scarcity that, objectively speaking, does not exist. It's not only our economic system that separates us from true wealth. And one thing I really appreciate about Helena's work is that she has gone so far beyond economics to talk about things like education, which offer people, not only do they take children away from that web of intimacy and connection, not only do they replace their the story that they had about every landform and every face in their community with essentially manufactured stories that we call history and literature and science. So not only does it cut them off from real wealth and convert that wealth into something measurable as scores on a test, but it also replaces their story of the world that was, of course, different everywhere on this planet, but had a common thread everywhere, replaces the story of the world that says we belong in a living universe, that we are not separate from the material world outside of ourselves, that the qualities of a self are not in human beings alone, but that we are with our brothers and sisters, that every animal, every plant, every landform, every hill, every mountain, every rock even. And again, I think Bio probably talked about this because I saw him carrying a rock. But every rock has beingness. Like, that story makes us wealthy. And the ontology that is put upon us by our educational system, by our medical system, et cetera, cuts us off from that. So it's not only our economic system that, ironically enough, makes us poor. It's also our mythology, our ideology. And this is a condition that has reached an extreme in our time. And because it is becoming intolerable, it's, I would say, even birthing us into, first, the space between stories, which I talked about earlier, and then a new and ancient story where we reclaim true wealth and embrace these things that have that we've been cut off from. These fundamental needs that a human being has, to know and to be known, to explore the boundaries of your world. All of these things are ripe opportunities for business when you cut them off. You cut off the possibility of exploring the boundaries of your world, and then you can sell fake adventures, and tourist packages and casino packages and things like that. And it's using fake wealth to compensate for the loss of real wealth. But I want to go a little bit beyond reclaiming true wealth, because it's not only that this will make us richer in our experience of being, it also makes us more powerful as agents of change. And so I'll tell a little story about that. I hope it's not too airy-fairy. So I was in Taiwan just for a day. I used to live there. A piece of my heart is still in Taiwan. I was there just stopping by for a day, and my friend took me on a hike into the mountains right from the airport, right? Got off the airplane, we go into the mountains, we drive into this pretty remote area, and we start walking to see these sacred trees. There was a sacred grove up there, supposedly. And we walked and walked and walked, and I was speaking that afternoon in Taipei, and he's like, we should probably turn back soon. But I said, no, let's just go up this one last slope. It wasn't inviting, it was muddy, but we said, okay, well, let's go up to the top of that, and then we'll turn around, because who knows? And I got to the top, and there was a sign that said, you can do it 5 more minutes to the sacred grove. It felt like we passed this little threshold, There was a guardian at the threshold, and so with renewed energy, we went, and these trees were just astonishingly huge, like maybe 4, 5, 6 meters in diameter. I mean, just enormous, like redwood size, but not as tall, but just like these 2,000-year-old enormous beings that somehow escaped the logging that has happened over the whole country. And we were just in awe of these beings. And I asked my friend, I said, Philip, do you think they're mad at us because we've cut down all of their brothers and sisters, and there's only these 7 or 8 trees left? Do you think they're mad at us? And he said, no, they're very happy to see us. And in that moment, it rang true. I knew it was true, what he said. And it was so natural to even ask that question, which is arrant nonsense in the story of the world that has been offered to us in our schooling, in which they can't be mad or happy to see us. That's an anthropomorphic projection. They're just woody tissue. How could they have, we're projecting human emotions onto them. That's a delusion. But in that moment, it was the most natural thing in the world to ask that question. That child's knowing was at the fore. That has somehow survived my conditioning. And I'm very grateful for that. I think it's probably in everybody, even the most hardened Monsanto executive or timber company executive. Like, that's something that cannot die because it's fundamental to who we are. So not only did I feel very rich at that moment, feeling no longer alone in the universe, for that moment felt I have my companions here. Something else happened. Those trees imprinted themselves onto me because of the way that I saw them. And I became no longer Charles. I became Charles plus these trees. And the words that I spoke thereafter, that afternoon, and maybe to some extent even today, are coming from that imprint. The trees are speaking to you through me. Sometimes people ask, if the spirits of the land are really so powerful, how come they haven't done anything about this situation? And the answer sometimes is, well, they've been waiting to be asked. Well, guess what? To even ask them, you have to see them through those eyes as a being you could ask. And to really believe it, to really see them at that moment, to allow that childlike perception. If we as a species, as the dominant culture, saw nature even 10% with those eyes, we would no longer be able to do the things that we're doing to this planet. So I'm not talking about just a philosophy here. I'm talking about an activist strategy. If you can, through giving people experiences, through telling stories, if you can create that moment of perception, that will change who the perpetrators are. And it's not a trivial matter to do this. It could require a lot of courage and creativity. But it has an unstoppable effect. A guy wrote to me from Australia and described this anti-fracking campaign that they did. I think it was in New South Wales. And this was a number of years ago, and it wasn't going well. They'd done all these direct actions, chained themselves to the machinery, done this and that, and they had this big encampment, and they heard that the police were coming. 800 heavily armed police sent by the government, and the media were coming, and it was all going to be the usual narrative of the, wild-eyed, disgruntled, anti-scientific protesters who are in the way of progress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they knew that they could not win this battle. So they decided to do something completely different. They decided, we're just going to have a party here. They got out the didgeridoos, the clapping sticks. They made this huge art project visible from the air. They just had a party, and the Aborigines were a big part of this movement as well. And somehow that paralyzed the government. There was no precedent for disrupting an Aboriginal festival. And they could no longer see it through the lens that they had been seeing it through. It disrupted their story, in other words. And I won't say too much more about disrupting the story as a tactic for activism, but in the end, they prevailed. The fracking company itself was made the target of a government investigation for corruption, and they totally won that battle without knowing. This wasn't a strategy, though. They weren't saying, like, we're going to make them feel sorry, you know, we're going to show them that we're just a celebration. Like, it was just kind of an upwelling of a celebratory impulse. And afterwards, one of the Aborigine women, one of the Aboriginal women told this, my friend, she said, because she was very moved, she said, usually the result of this would be how it's always been, you know, all the black fellows would get arrested, some of the white fellows would get arrested too, and the project would go on. But this time, because you changed your vision and didn't see it through the eyes of conflict, it allowed the spirits of nature to operate through you. And when that happens, you cannot possibly lose. So I'll just end by saying that as we step into this new and ancient way of seeing, tremendous things are possible. We're going to do this thing, people.